everyone to the first session of our Lunch and Learn series, Centering the Child. I'm Emma Nugent, Project Officer at the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. This session will explore how family violence impacts child development and attachment. We'll be using a case scenario throughout to guide our discussion and hear from expert panelists about trauma-informed practice and child-focused responses. However, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet. The Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the past and present traditional custodians and elders of this country on which we work. We also acknowledge the injustices and trauma suffered as a result of European settlement, including the stolen generations and forced removal of children. We honour and respect the resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the ongoing aspirations for self-determination and empowerment. I'm pleased to be kicking off the first session of the Centre's Centering the Child Lunch and Learn series. This series is designed to support practitioners in aligning their practice with the MARAM framework, particularly when working with children and young people impacted by family violence. We know that children are victim survivors in their own right, and that the experiences of family violence can significantly affect their development, emotional well-being, and sense of safety. This series aims to strengthen our collective understanding of how to respond in ways that are child-focused, trauma-informed, and collaborative. Throughout the series, we'll be using a case scenario, Haley's story, to explore how family violence can manifest in a child's life and how practitioners can respond across different stages of intervention. Let's take a moment to highlight two foundational responsibilities under the MARAM framework, which underpin today's session. Responsibility 1, respectful, safe, and inclusive engagement. This responsibility requires practitioners to engage with children and young people in ways that are respectful, culturally safe, and inclusive. Recognize that children may not always disclose their experiences directly, and that their behaviours may be expressions of trauma. And to create environments where children feel safe to express themselves and where their voices are heard and validated. In Haley's case, we will see how her anxiety, reluctance to attend school, and protectiveness toward her mother are indicators of distress. Practitioners must be attuned to these signs and respond with empathy and sensitivity. Responsibility 2 is the identification of family violence. This responsibility involves being able to identify indicators of family violence, including those that may be less visible in children and young people, understanding that children's experiences may differ from adults in the same household, and using structured professional judgment and evidence-based tools to assess risk. Haley's story illustrates how children may minimize their own fear to protect a parent or may not have the language to describe what's happening. Practitioners must be proactive in recognizing signs such as emotional dysregulation, psychosomatic symptoms, and school disengagement. Today we'll focus on how trauma affects developmental milestones and attachment, and how to engage safely and sensitively with children and young people. Just a quick note on housekeeping before we dive in. Today's session is being recorded. Audience members' microphones and cameras will remain off by default for the duration of today's session. If you experience technical issues, please try exiting and rejoining. If not, I'm also monitoring the chat box and can assist audience members if needed. Please use the Q&A box for questions or reflections. And some of today's content may be distressing, so please take care when listening and engaging, and please reach out to the support services that I'll list in the chat shortly if any concerns for you or others have come up today. Just bear with me while I pop those in the chat for you. Oh, apologies about the delay. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. So those support services are in the chat for you. We encourage you to engage actively in today's session. Share your questions, reflections, and experiences in the chat. This is a space for learning, connection, and strengthening practice together. Thank you for being here. Now let's take a look at Haley's story. You all should have received a copy of the case scenario and other relevant material this morning before our session, but we'll be going through the case study anyway to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Haley's story will guide our discussion. Her experiences reflect the complex realities children face in family violence contexts. But first, let me introduce you to Haley. Haley is 12 years old and a Year 6 student. She lives on a dairy farm with her parents and is experiencing anxiety, poor sleep, and emotional distress, as well as exposure to parental conflict and substance misuse. She attends a small local primary school, and recently she's noticed increased conflict between her parents, especially around financial stress. Her story reflects the complex realities children face in family violence contexts. Haley's father has been drinking more and becomes angry and aggressive when intoxicated. Haley has witnessed yelling and property damage during arguments, and she feels responsible for her mother's well-being and has avoided school to stay home. When police visited, she downplayed her fear to protect her father. This illustrates how children may internalize responsibility and minimize their own safety concerns. Haley's mother has confided in a friend about escalating violence and her own emotional struggles. She is experiencing symptoms of depression and feeling overwhelmed. Haley hopes someone can help her family. This highlights the importance of peer support and the potential for informal disclosures to lead to help seeking. All of these points will be discussed further in our Q&A session with our panelists. But first, let's take a closer look at Haley's profile. As I mentioned, she's in year 6 and is currently experiencing school can't. She has anxiety, irregular sleep, and psychosomatic complaints. She's at risk of depression if support isn't accessed. Her interests have faded and she spends time alone on her iPad. She is deeply affected by her mother's distress and wants to help. Haley's mum is emotionally overwhelmed and experiencing coercive control. She shows signs of depression and trauma responses like hypervigilance and avoidance, and she has limited social support and needs, such as mental health support, safety planning, peer connection, and a GP assessment and a possible referral to public mental health services. Whereas Haley's father is showing signs of significant distress and behavioural concerns. His alcohol use has increased and he becomes impulsive and angry when drinking. He may be experiencing depression or anxiety as suggested by irritability and hopelessness about the farm and finances. He's defensive and ambivalent about seeking help, which is common in cases involving shame or denial. He needs a multi-pronged support approach, such as AAD intervention, addressing the use of family violence, anger management, and mental health assessment with potential referral to public services if risk escalates. Understanding the dynamics between Haley's parents is crucial for assessing risk and planning interventions that centre child safety and well-being. Today, we're joined by two expert panelists who will share insights and strategies from their practice experiences. They'll help us unpack key concepts and apply them to Haley's case. Panelists will share approaches to trauma-informed care and how to support children's recovery and resilience. Today, we'll discuss safe and sensitive engagement, collaborative risk assessment, as well as supporting emotional regulation. I'd love to introduce you today to both Andrea McCarrick and Jordan Sloan. Let me spotlight them for you both so you can see them easily. Bear with me 1 second. Here we go. Amazing. Hi, Andrea. Hi, Jordan. I'll just read your bios before we get started. So, Andrea McCarrick is a qualified social worker with 18 years of experience at Anglicare, working across the Outer East and Gippsland regions in programs supporting children and families. With 11 years in direct practice and 7 in leadership, she currently serves as practice leader for Integrated Family Services in Gippsland. Andrea is passionate about improving responses to family violence, advocating for children and young people as victim survivors, and ensuring those who use violence are visible in interventions. Jordan Sloan is the Children and Young People Practice Leader at Free. Jordan is an experienced practitioner, leader, and trainer and has over a decade of frontline experience across a multitude of sectors, working directly with children and young people, such as youth custodial, sexual exploitation, crime prevention, community youth justice, health case management, courts and legal assistance, and family violence. Jordan is passionate about working within an intersectional and strengths-based lens to support children and young people who have been weaponized by violent perpetrators and face systemic disadvantage. Jordan holds a Bachelor in Human Services, Master in Social Work, and a Master in Domestic and Family Violence Practice. Welcome, Jordan and Andrea. Thank you both for being here today. Just wanted to flag to the audience that if you do have any questions or comments or reflections for our panelists today, please use the question and answer box or the chat, and we'll try to get to them if time permits. But firstly, I'd love to open the conversation to both of you to hear about foundational concepts in child development and attachment. So let's start with a big question, first of all. Why is attachment important? And both of you, I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that question as well.
I'm happy, Andrew, if you want to go first.
No, we were in this awkward who goes first, weren't we? Go for it, Jordan.
Yeah, that's a big, important question. And I think the most crucial thing we have to understand is that even from prenatally and with infants, we need to understand the bonds that are formed between the infant and its parents, and understanding the elements of what forms that healthy attachment and what developmental stage we can expect given any age range is really important for us to be able to anticipate individual children's needs. And I think this is mostly important, especially for services where a lot of the time your primary client is the presenting adult victim survivor, and you may not even be able to meet or observe the child or young person within your designated support period. So it can assist in validating victim survivors' concerns about developmental delay, undiagnosed disability, and providing appropriate and effective referral pathways for sustainable supports for children and young people. So that's why it's really important to understand the attachment.
Thanks, Jordan. Andrea?
Yeah, definitely agree. I echo everything that Jordan said. I think there's a real interplay between development and attachment. Attachment definitely impacts development. We know that. So it's important to, be mindful of developmental stages, to be looking at interactions that you're seeing in the parent-child relationship, but not just taking one interaction that you've seen as, that's, an observed pattern of attachment, because we know there can be inconsistency in insecure attachment relationships as well. So needing to be mindful that it's something you're needing to look at over time as well. And we don't have to know everything, right? Like, I think everyone puts a lot of pressure on themselves to know everything. There's a lot of tools out there from a developmental perspective that you can take with you when you're engaging with parents. You don't have to keep in your head everything that you're meant to see from the developmental stages, from birth through to adulthood. There's things that you can use with you to help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You both mentioned how attachment and development are so intertwined with one another. Andrea, what are some of the key developmental stages for children and young people? And what are maybe some signs that attachment needs are being met within these stages?
Well, when we're looking at development, we've got the in utero phase that we're looking at, as Jordan was mentioning earlier. We've got infancy, infancy, preschoolers going into school-aged, adolescents. So we're going through all of these stages where we're looking for, as Jordan mentioned, there's key milestones that we're looking at. We need to keep in mind that these tools are predominantly for white families. They're not culturally specific. So we don't want to generalise when we're working with Aboriginal families or families from culturally diverse backgrounds. We need to make sure we're not putting a lens on there that doesn't fit. So I think when we're looking at development through all of those stages, there's so many things that I think practitioners can come up against. And that's, we obviously are looking at, are they meeting these milestones that we're expecting them to meet? Is this trauma? If they're not, is there neurodivergence coming in here as well? Is there both neurodivergence and trauma at play here? But I think before we can actually start to investigate some of those questions, we actually first need to identify, are they actually where we're expecting children to be at that point in time? From an attachment perspective, attachment has a really significant impact in those early years around a sense of safety and a sense of security that allows children to feel safe to explore their world, or, the world to potentially be a scary place that they're actually not comfortable, separating from their parent to do that. Or for some children, they just wander off and they're not really attached to their primary caregiver in a way that we would hope to see in a secure attachment. So when we think about the importance of play in early years, that's really vital. And we're thinking about, obviously we're aiming for a secure attachment, which is going to mean that kids are going to feel comfortable to leave their caregiver, go off and play, come back and check in with their caregiver again. But we also know that trauma and family violence has a significant impact on attachment. And for the most part, what we all probably see in our work are insecure attachments that we're needing to, try and do some repair on when it's safe to do so. So, there's different things that you'd be looking for, throughout the lifespan. I think at the end of the day, we're really looking at what do those interactions look like, regardless of the developmental stage. What do they look like from the perspective of the child or young person, the way they engage with their parent, the way they look to them for guidance, or whether they are actually approaching the world from a really independent space. So yeah, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint down around, this at each age, but we're really looking for things that indicate something that's, not what you're expecting to see at different ages, really. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. To go further into that, Jordan, I might bring you in here. Just thinking about how Andrew was talking about trauma and neurodivergence and how insecure attachments can affect these stages. How does neglect affect development, especially when responding in a family violence context?
Really important question, Emma. I was going to, go off the back of what Andrew was saying, especially around these key milestones, key developmental stages. Once again, I really want to echo, they're not necessarily relevant or shouldn't be milestones for when we're talking about culturally linguistically diverse families and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. But the impact of neglect in particular, neglect can look like a lot of different things, but if we think about neglect in terms of, say, like not proper nutrition or not responding to emotions, so infants, toddlers, primary school, even young people, if they don't have a safe space, like if we think of attachment from the theoretical sense in terms of like the parent or the caregiver being the safe space, so they provide this nurture and stability, and then they're also that person in a young person's life that they come back to when they're not feeling safe, when they're venturing out into the world. That neglect can really sever that attachment around the child or young person's ability to be able to recognize who is a trusted adult, who is a trusted person, form healthy relationships that are outside of the caregiver. So with neglect, we're seeing children, young people, their emotions not being responded to. If you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like their physical needs not being met, stability of housing, the literal food, warmth, affection, things like that, that really inhibits not only attachment, but also developmental stages. Like if infants, particularly if we're thinking of the frame of family violence, if the family violence, the person using family violence is stopping the mother from breastfeeding the child, then there's significant nutritional delay that happens, which means that physiologically that baby's not going to be developing in those milestones that we would expect them to, in terms of responding, mirroring, smiling, talking, even that actual physical growth, putting weight on. That then has like flow-on effects into how that child is going to develop and hitting those milestones at the stages that we would expect them to see based on their chronological age. So neglect in terms of those specific things and in that frame of family violence have a huge impact on attachment and development.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Andrea. I think you've both answered my question around how practitioners can identify how attachment is disrupted, but thinking about like what tools practitioners can support children who do not actually verbalize their distress but show signs through behavior. Do you have any reflections around that, how practitioners can support children and young people in this stage?
Are we talking in general, or are we talking in relation to the age of Hayley in the scenario, Emma?
More in general, but if you have any reflections around Hayley, go for it.
Mm.
Big question once again.
Yeah, can you ask the question again for me?
Yeah. How can practitioners support children who do not verbalize the stress but show signs through their behaviour?
I think, from the perspective of the roles I've had in children and family services, we're really looking to the children's behaviour to actually provide us a lot of information about what's going on. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, overt behaviours in the sense of, children who are really, acting out themselves. I think, particularly when we're looking at, the context of family violence, it's the explosive child that gets the focus. And then you'll often have a withdrawn, really withdrawn, socially isolating child off to the side, but they're not causing a lot of issues for the parents or the school or whoever else it may be. But they're the children that we really need to be looking out for as well. So I think we really need to be analysing all of the children that we're seeing. Again, it's this complicated overlay of temperament. We're going to have some children, obviously you've got children with different temperaments. So really needing to unpack to know what they've been like throughout their lifespan as well. Because if you're looking at an older child like Hayley, what was Hayley like when she was a baby, when she was a toddler, or going through to the lifespan up until she got to there, so that we can try and sort of pinpoint what's been going on for her at different points in time in her life as well. So the more information that we know about how a child is presented throughout their life, how their parents talk about them, are they talking about them from a positive framework? Or are they talking about them negatively, or are they talking about them, in a way where they actually are really lacking information about them as well? That can tell us a lot. So I think we need to be mindful of all of those presentations that we see, the child that's really out there, but then the child that's really quiet as well. And, you'll see sometimes when you go into home visits or appointments with families, you'll see the kid that comes right at you and they're, I want to show you my toy. And then you might have another child that's sitting next to mum and not really moving from mum's side, but might need you to just sit back a little bit rather than jump into that child to start talking to them too. So again, it's a complicated overlay of trying to separate out the trauma impacts potentially from everything else that comes into play as children are developing too.
Absolutely. Jordan, did you have any reflections? No worries.
Yeah, I just had I was thinking about the term like practical tools for practitioners as well to draw on, and I think something as well. Absolutely echo everything that Andrew says, particularly around we do need to keep in mind any child that's presenting as like, oh, they're fine, like they're academically performing, things like that. But I think a really important thing also to note in our practice is that we're not expecting, particularly any sort of victim survivors that are coming to our services, to be experts on child development, and that if they are concerned or if there are things because that we know, like particularly mothers, parents who are like the presenting victim survivors, they know their kids, they know what's normal for their kids, and they know what seems to be abnormal for their children. And so there are plenty of services that we can draw on as professionals. We can seek secondary consultation, but we can also encourage or attend appointments alongside the people that we're supporting. Services like the maternal child health nurse service, GPs, mental health services, things like that, disability specialists, where if there are extra things that need to be used in the home, particularly if we're talking about neurodivergent young people, helping with emotional regulation, things like that, that there are other services that can fill in those gaps about what's actually happening for that child's development, and that not everyone in the room who's presenting to our service or that parent or the child themselves are going to be expected to be the expert to respond and identify what might be missing or what might need to be met.
Definitely. That's a really good point, Jordan. They're the expert on their child, but not the expert on where they're at in, the developmental lifespan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Andrea. We might move on to another question. Jordan, how can practitioners support healthy attachment in children who have experienced relational trauma?
That is a great question. I think if we, especially with the family violence context, we have to be so mindful about what's actually happening in that environment at the end of the day, at the end of the session. Are they going back into a violent, volatile house or home or situation where the person who's using violence is still doing that? Because I think we can do the things that we can try and do to repair attachment, and but we need to be so mindful of that safety and of what's happening for that child or young person, what they're actually holding, that's continuing on. But to answer the question more broadly, I think in terms of attachment, I think also something that needs to be said is that if there is attachment disruptions or injuries, as I like to call them, they can be healed. Like, there is hope. It's not this desolate, like, oh, if they've had terrible attachment and they're not hitting their developmental milestones, this child, young person is destined for failure. That is absolutely not correct. And there's lots of different ways that we as professionals can assist families to repair attachment and to provide that hope as well and be that mirror of hope. I think something that you'd mentioned before, Andrea and Emma as well, just around like play and how important those other sort of creative mechanisms, and once again to really touch on culturally appropriate attachment bonds, things like nature could play a really important process in realigning attachment. And it may not even necessarily be communication has broken down. It could be like, if we're talking about younger children, we can assist with reforming attachment and reforming bonds and security. It could be just like playing a game together, and that predictability and that routine of having like a set time of the day where you play a game of Monopoly Deal, or you play a game of just throwing the ball to each other. These sort of particularly parallel play opportunities where the parent and the child can work together are things that start rehashing those neurons in their brain, where they start re-trusting that parent. And I think as well, something to be really mindful of, to hark back what I first said as well, is that especially in the context of family violence, the person using family violence, particularly if they are a parent or a step parent, part of their violence may be deliberately undermining the other parent's parental authority and that bond. So once again, like to sum up what I was saying, just like be really mindful about what that pattern of violence looks like and how that's actually targeting the bond, because we can still do these things, but if there is no accountability, or if there's no counteraction in terms of holding like what that violence actually looks like for the bond of that attachment, it's kind of just like we're not going to get very far. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you make a great point about hope there. I think so much of our work is around challenges, and we're working in like almost this cycle of crises in a way that we forget to center hope sometimes. And I think it's just such an important reminder that there is hope, and that that is probably the end goal for a lot of our families, is to have that hope at the end of the tunnel. So thank you for that reminder.
Definitely. I think we need to be mindful as well. I think picking up on what Jordan said at the beginning, they are really looking at what the pattern of behaviour is from the person using violence, because to have a secure attachment, relies on a sense of safety for children in the first place. So if they're going home to an environment where the person using violence is still there, they're going to be feeling unsafe. So you're going to be coming up against it if you're trying to do a therapeutic intervention to build a secure attachment when they're actually not safe when they go home. You're missing the key element that you need, one of the key elements you need to have a secure attachment. And not only that, I think we're potentially putting things onto mum that she's not capable of doing because the family violence is interfering with that and is stopping her from being able to do that. We know that there's, direct impacts of persons using violence interfering in the mother-child relationship in a way where they will actually, directly damage it, keep them away from each other, undermine it, as Jordan was saying. So I think that we need to be mindful of timing around some of this as well. If we try and do it at the wrong time, then we're creating a real sense of shame for the victim survivor around something else that she's unable to do. And she'll take that on rather than placing that responsibility with the person using violence as well. And we're also then creating another episode of the child or young person, being set up to, mum's going to do all this stuff with you that then potentially she can't do because of the violence. So we're actually in those sort of cases doing more harm than we are doing good. So, I really like what Jordan was saying before, building on the play side of things instead of, just starting with if they can have some time together, just do something fun that's not a big thing, even if it's 5 minutes, doesn't have to be an hour. But we really need to be mindful of where is mum at and where is the person using violence at, and making sure that, when we are looking at repair, that we've got safety at that bottom base. We need the safety there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Jordan. We'll move into some more specific questions about Hayley's story in a second. Just noticed we had a question in the Q&A just around sharing resources for development and attachment for children and young people that are affected by family violence. That's something we can definitely share after the webinar. We'll send out a resource pack with the recording of today's session, as well as the slides that I shared earlier, along with any other relevant resources. So yeah, please look out for that in your inbox. But yeah, something we can definitely get to you at a later date. So we'll go into Hayley's story now and talk about that in a little bit more depth, and maybe discuss some practical strategies for supporting children like her. Just to open the conversation, what stands out to you both about Hayley's story the most?
Do you want to go, Jordan? Again, we're doing that awkward. Who goes next?
I know. Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think some of the main things that stand out to me about Hayley, that if I was a practitioner and Hayley or Hayley's mum was referred to our service, one of the first things is that they live in a really rural, remote community. So being super, super mindful that like our theme of attachment and development, that's also happening in like this really like echo chamber, first of all, community, but also like everyone has eyes on this family. And then also a really poignant point is that Hayley's experiences of what's going on may be dismissed because there may be people in that very small community who've got really good relationships with her father. And so once again, her own perspective of what's going on, if I was to speak to her, if I was to do safety planning and any sort of MARAM risk assessment, that her perspective of her own risk or her perspective of what's actually going on, despite what I'm reading and what's on paper, may be very, very different, and also be informed by her peers, parents. She's at that age where she's going to sleepovers and play dates and all sorts of things. So that small community actually plays a really significant part, which I know Andrea can definitely speak to more, of what that support period will actually look like, and what Hayley may identify as needs for herself. I think as well, like the dad's use of substances, how that escalates his violence, how that also escalates Hayley's risk, that we're seeing at the moment. There's no real indicators that he may not necessarily be targeting her. But once again, children are not mere witnesses that Hayley is experiencing family violence, despite the fact that on paper it looks like and can be unfortunately mislabeled as a mutualization of or just intimate partner violence between mum and dad. So these are other things that I'd be looking out for, where I just wanted to be validating Hayley's perspective and Hayley's experience of family violence. But these would be kind of like the main things that are sticking out to me as I first look over what's happening for her. Yeah.
Thanks, Jordan. Andrea, any reflections?
I think, adding on to what Jordan was saying, we can already see that there's something in the case study coming through. There's a point where mum says, don't worry about it. I think it's around the, wanting to work and provide some help. So we're already getting a sense of Hayley sort of putting out there, some fears. And because of the violence that mum's experiencing, she's unable to attune to that in that moment, and instead, her response, which is trying to be helpful to Hayley, is don't worry about it. We've got it, kind of thing. But for Hayley, I would imagine that's not how it's received on her end, and I think that's the really important part of services when they come in here, because we know that mum is so attuned to trying to keep them safe at the moment that there's things that she can't do, which is some of that side of things. And I think that's the role of services, to be able to sit with Hayley and sort of talk to her a little bit about what's going on for her, and what her fears are, and what she needs to feel safer at the end of the day, because we're already seeing some hypervigilance and withdrawal behaviours from her.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Another question for you both. This time I might ask Andrew to go first, since Jordan did last time. If you were the practitioner working with Hayley, what would be your first step?
I think I'd be wanting to have a chat with Hayley about what's going on. As I was saying before, I think it's important to find out from Hayley, though, if she would feel comfortable doing that, on her own, or whether she might want mum there. Or she might want, a favourite teacher there, or something like that. So I think it's important, first of all, to get some understanding around her willingness, and what that looks like to make her feel more comfortable. And I think we obviously need to be clear about what our role is, our mandate, the limitations of confidentiality. We need to be clear about, what we potentially need to do with information. We can't set up a trusting relationship and then pull out the wool, the rug from underneath her, if she says something that we need to do something about. I think ideally we want to try and create a scenario where we're not just sitting and staring at each other and trying to have this really difficult conversation. So whether it is, she likes artwork, whether it's about doing that, going for a walk, whatever the case may be. And again, put it in her hands. What does she want to do when we go out together? So we're giving her some control of her world, which at the moment she's really lacking. So let's give her some control and some authority over this space so that we can do that. I think that we need to approach it from the perspective of, we know some of this stuff that's going on. Let's not try and trap Hayley in, this expectation that you're going to say something, and then we're going to jump on it. Let's just be clear. Look, we know some of this stuff's been going on. Do you feel comfortable talking about that? So that we can try and unpack that a little bit more. But I think, I think the key messages that we want Hayley to be aware of when we, I suppose, end that session with her, is that what's happening is not her fault. She's not responsible for fixing it, and acknowledging that she's in a really difficult space. Of what we're seeing is that she's protecting her dad, but she's obviously really upset with some of the things that he's doing as well, and acknowledging that, and acknowledging that's quite normal, under the circumstances of what's going on. A lot of kids in her position have that tension between love and hate with the parent who's causing the harm, and want to protect them as well. So I think we want to normalise some of her feelings and her responses, but really try and let her know that this is something that, we obviously want to try and help mum and dad to do differently. But again, also, we don't want to set her up for this, scenario where we're going to fix it all either, because we may not be able to. So I think if we're asking her, what do you want to be different here, we need to also acknowledge that we can't necessarily achieve that. That, we obviously want to work with mum and dad to address the concerns, but we can't necessarily guarantee that what she wants and what she needs is going to be the outcome.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Andrea. Jordan, any reflections?
Honestly, couldn't articulate it better, Andrea. That's, yeah, exactly. I think when we're talking about young people in particular, where they're like on that cusp of entering adolescence, entering high school world, secondary school, exactly what Andrea said, those things around ensuring that that internalized shame is probably first and foremost addressed, because we can see that throughout this case study that she wants to get a part-time job, she wants to help, she probably steps in and tries to de-escalate dad. Like there's a lot of that like adultification happening where we can see that that's a real emergence, but also with that comes that internalized shame. And we need to also really establish how is she coping? Does that look like self-harm? Is she starting to have suicidal ideation? That sort of stuff is the things that we need to focus on first and foremost, because like Andrea said, and particularly like speaking from limitations within the family violence service sector, those support periods are not long enough to build sustainable rapport for young people in particular, and then also do those outworkings of the things that she may expect the service to do or to help her with that we actually cannot meet because of those funding limitations, because of those KPI limitations, whatever that may be. So never promising what you can't deliver is like rule number one with children and young people, and everything that Andrea said, absolutely echo that would be the first steps, that more creative, going for a walk, establishing some sort of rapport first, and really establishing what the limitations of the service are, so that young person knows like what their expectation is to change and what things can change in that short amount of time and what may take a bit more time and who else can help in the meantime.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jordan. Another question for you. You talked about sort of those behaviors and presentations that we might see from adolescent and school-age children like Hayley. In those circumstances, how can we assess attachment-related issues in adolescents?
I'm happy to go.
Oh, sorry. I assumed it was you, Jordan. Sorry, I'm just standing here staring.
I know. I'm so sorry. That was my bad. So, sorry, Emma, you said how do we assess attachment-related issues?
Yeah, in school-age children like Hayley.
So I think if we think developmentally milestone generalization around this age and stage, we're starting to see very much 12-year-olds still reliant on parents for identity, belonging, stability, nurturance, all that sort of thing, but starting to look to peers for identity and belonging, starting to look to others. And with Hayley, that school can't is a big clue and indicator that she's not coping, and that her secure attachment to her parents and caregivers, something's not right. And we obviously know about the family violence and the specifics of what that looks like, but those behavioural indicators are a huge one, where if we didn't know about family violence, if a teacher had come to our service for a secondary consultation or whatever that might have looked like, that those sort of behaviours are, especially for school-age children like Hayley, an indicator where school can't means there's something else going on. I think as well, things like her nightmares and sleep disruptions, that's a massive indicator that attachment is ruptured. Because if you think about attachment, you think just about like, attachment is safety and stability. And for safety and stability in the home, for someone who has a safe and stable parent caregiver or multiple parent caregivers, those things like being able to go to school, what I like to call keeping up appearances, keeping friends, maintaining friendships, attending sleepovers, attending play dates, sleeping, eating, all those sorts of things, they tend to be like, there may be some nuance in terms of like, there might be some anxiety, might be some depression, but with a chance to come back to that safe and stable place, that they're nurtured to continue to meet those. And by school age children, it's more like academic milestones as well as physical and emotional and reasoning milestones. So those sort of things that we're seeing coming out for Hayley, those would be really big indicators that, yeah, that attachment, there's something happening there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Andrea, I might get you to follow that one up. But also
Mm.
thinking about how might trauma and learned coping mechanisms influence Haley's behavior, both at school but also at home.
Yeah. Um, as we've spoken about a bit so far, we're definitely already seeing that kind of withdrawal type behaviour from her. There's the psychosomatic symptoms that are coming through as well. And obviously the struggles with getting to school because she's anxious about wanting to make sure that mum's okay. So we're definitely getting a sense of, being in or moving into that anxious attachment space for her at this point in time. I think the worry is that the withdrawal is going to continue to be more significant for Haley as time goes on. So we might start to see a real withdrawal from friendships potentially. And I think, as Jordan touched on, because we're in that stage of between grade 6 going into year 7, there's already developmentally some big milestones there as far as potential shifts in friendships, and there can then be, in year 7 moving and finding different friendships as well. So if we're going to have, potentially a lot of missed school, that's going to 100% disrupt that as well. Being in the rural area also has an impact on that, because it's not like she can just, go to a friend's house next door or just around the corner. Public transport's probably going to be a significant issue as well. So there'd be reliance on, you would imagine, reliance on a parent to get her to see friends. You're probably not going to ask dad to do that when dad's a scary person. And she's probably not going to want to put anything on mum's plate at the moment either, because she's already worried about mum. So she's probably going to avoid trying to, ask mum to do more things. So that's going to contribute to the social isolation for her as well, which is so significant at this developmental stage of her life. And it's really hard to then, when we think about what we see from kids who are missing a lot of school, they go back to school and then they step away from school again because so much has changed in the time that they've been away, and the friendships have shifted a little bit, and it looks like these two guys are closer than they were last time I was there, so I don't know where I fit. And so we're probably going to start to see some more of that as well. We might start to see, I'd be worried about potential self-harming behaviours coming in for her, given there's that real internalised around mental health, the internalised shame, as Jordan touched on earlier. I think that would be a really key concern. And you could definitely see her, being one of those kids that's going to run around and clean up the house and cook dinner and, try and do all of these things just to make things easier for mum and dad, and to try and keep the peace as well. If there was a younger sibling there, we'd probably be expecting to see some really parentified behaviour from her coming through as well. So I think she's one of these kids that we touched on earlier, where they're the quiet ones, where it's, we don't worry about them so much. That the thing that's probably blaring is going to be the school attendance, is going to be the big thing that's going to stand out from the school's perspective and from the system's perspective. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that's been going on underneath that. That's the end point kind of thing. So a lot going on for her. I think you'd probably be, from a teacher's perspective, I think you'd be expecting to see a kid that's probably not going to be performing as well in school because she's so tired, because of the school that she's missing, because of her mental health. So low mood is going to be impacting that as well. So they might start to see a kid that's, off with the fairies, as they will sometimes refer to. We're going to see some dysregulation coming through from her as well. But yeah, again, I think the social withdrawal and the inability to concentrate at school. I mean, when the world is scary, when you're at home, when you're at school, you're not focused on maths and, learning your times tables. You're focused on what's going to happen when I get home, and is mum going to be okay? Is dad going to start drinking when he gets home? All of this is going to be running through her head. So she's going to be living in a state of hypervigilance for most of the day.
Absolutely. Just conscious of time as we are quickly running out of it. A question for you both, just to round out this section, is what are some simple everyday actions practitioners can take to help children feel seen and heard?
This is a great question.
Mm.
I think this is very important given, I think, historically and even currently, the service system is designed for adults. And I think for particularly children and young people to be seen and heard and feel like they're being seen and heard is incredibly, incredibly important. Something that I say to practitioners all the time is that if you can provide even one positive experience of a service, even talking to or acknowledging the presence of a child or young person, that is more likely going to build up their confidence to help seek in the future than if they had a negative experience, if they were ignored or if they were labeled as just like a dependent. I think being super like we'd Andrew and I had already said earlier, like being really transparent about your system's limitations, but being so incredibly explicit that the violence is not their fault and that they are not to blame and they're also not responsible. I think something that we see all the time and we see with Hayley as well is this idea of adultification, where they're exposed to things that they really shouldn't be at that age. The level of violence, degrading language, having a parent or caregiver that they care about a lot be undermined, mum's not trustworthy with money, and then also her going along and hearing the things that are happening and mum's perspective, which is not to blame or shame mum, but the child or young person's experience includes what is happening to that parent. And we see as well, like Hayley doesn't want to go to school because she feels protectiveness over her mother, that if she is present in the home, she thinks that, oh, if I'm home, at least the violence won't be as bad than if I'm not there. And so this like responsibility over the violence, being able to name it and validate it, even if it's a single session, even if you never see that child or young person ever again. But like Andrea said, like naming and validating it is so incredibly important for that child or young person to feel like they are being seen by you as the service system, as an individual professional, as a mum's worker, whatever you are in that child or young person's life, that they are seen and they're understood by literally acknowledging their presence, by offering to play a game with them, by remembering their name if you see them more than once, asking them how their day was, asking them, what did you work on at school? Like just acknowledging their presence and being a positive support, even if it means that you're not risk assessments with them directly, even if you're not safety planning with them directly, if you are acknowledging their presence, that is such an important step for them to remember that. And if in the future they want to seek their own support period, if they want to seek their own help, they'll remember that you provided that positive experience for them. And so it's not as scary to seek help as well.
Thanks, Jordan. That was great.
Yeah, great answer. I echo everything that Jordan just said. I think that we really need to see children as being the barometer of the family, that parents can, will say a lot of things that are not necessarily accurate of what's going on for a whole lot of reasons. Particularly when we're looking at, in the family services, child and family services system, there's a lot of fear around child protection, which dad is probably talking to in the background as well, which we need to be mindful of, the fear around that too, which potentially Hayley is exposed to as well. So there'd be potentially fear from Hayley around, what engaging in the service system might look like. So I think that we need to really see them as, their behaviour is the honest thing that we're going to see shining through, and that's going to tell us so much. And you don't necessarily in the moment need to know what it means, but you just need to, when you're there, when you're present, look at the behaviour, take notes of it, and then go away and reflect on it later with your supervisor, with a colleague, whoever, so that then you can unpack what was that behaviour showing us. That's what we want to go back to. But I think that the basics of, we want them to have a voice. We want them, as Jordan said, we want them to know that they're heard and that they're seen in that space. I think just asking a child, what do you want to be different in your family, tells them that we actually see value in their voice, that they're an important part of this family. They're not just you're on the side there while I'm talking to mum or dad, and I'm going to ignore you as well. We're really giving them the floor at that point in time to have a voice. So it doesn't have to be this whiz-bang thing where, we're taking them to the zoo or, whatever the case may be. It's a simple, conversation, as Jordan said, an acknowledgement, seeing that they're there. And I think the one thing that we can really do in our intervention is make sure that when we're closing, regardless of what your role is, that you're making sure that there is a safe person for that child to be able to speak to, so that when you're not there, there is someone that they can go to and talk through what the challenges are, someone that's going to continue to be there. So not a psychologist that's going to have 6 sessions and then close, someone that will continue to be in their life, that they can talk through their worries with.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you again, Jordan. It's been a pleasure listening to you both this afternoon, and I feel like I could listen to you talk for hours and hours, and I still have many more questions that I want to ask you, but we don't have enough time, unfortunately. But thank you once again for all your valuable insights.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks,
Jordan. Thanks, Andrea. Bear with me while I share my screen for one final time. Just get this all organized. Beautiful. So thank you for joining us today. We hope this session has deepened your understanding of how family violence affects child development and attachment, and how to respond in a child-centered, trauma-informed way. Please take a moment to complete the post-session survey. It helps us improve future sessions as part of this series. As for next steps, this session recording will be shared with you, so please keep an eye on your inbox for that, and we'll include any other relevant resources that might be useful for you. Also, stay tuned for session 2 in the series, which will occur on Wednesday, 1st of October. This will explore including the child's voice in risk assessment and management. Also, if you have any questions or would like to follow up, please feel free to contact me directly. But please put all your virtual hands together once again for Jordan and Andrea, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.